I'm speaking today with Colin Barnacle. He is a partner in the law firm of Akerman LLP. Colin, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Akerman just published a return to work resource guide with a lot of good pointers about the things that companies should be concerned about. And I want to run down some of those major ones. Maybe we can start with worker accommodations. What types of concerns and changes will have to be made in order to accommodate that aspect of the work environment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Akerman developed a return to work resource center where we've put our minds together and put together about 60 different documents that address all the different types of things that workplaces need to be thinking about in light of the return to work that a lot of people are doing right now. You know, to your question about accommodations, it's going to be interesting because, the ADA has its own definition of what is and what is not a disability. And the question is somebody who has coronavirus or symptoms related to coronavirus, is that a disability? So a lot of times there may be accommodation requests related to coronavirus, and employers are going to be asking themselves, is this or is this not a disability? But a lot of times, that's not really the question they should be asking. They should be asking themselves, can we accommodate this? Is this something we need to be thinking about? And there's so many different laws out there now related to coronavirus and leave and expanded FMLA. So we're clients to think long and hard about requests. Can we accommodate these, and what other laws apply? It's not just the ADA anymore.
Yeah, and I would imagine, I don't know how much precedent there is for a disease that has an end, it's not chronic, supposedly, to be considered a disability. It doesn't seem like if you caught any other type of a disease in the workplace, it would be classified thusly, would it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So typically, ailments that have a finite date or could be short lasting typically wouldn't qualify for the definition of a disability. But the ADA doesn't ask employers to be doctors, doesn't ask them to make an analysis of whether somebody does or doesn't have a disability. It asks employers to ask questions about accommodation. Is this something we can accommodate, whatever these needs may be? And that's called the interactive process. And the ADA requires that interactive process, that back and forth between the employer and the employee, regardless of whether it's a disability or not. So that's just something for employers to really think about right now. And there's going to be so many issues like this coming up where people, there's a little bit of anxiety going on right now. Anyone who has the common cold might think that they have the coronavirus. And we want people to be proactive. We want people to be taking care of each other. So, employers need to think about that too and say, if somebody's not feeling well, we'd rather them go home. And, even if it's not coronavirus, we want to have that kind of culture where, people are taking care of each other. They're thinking about their fellow worker because that's what's good for business.
But in the workplace now, what types of steps do you recommend that employers should be taking to ensure worker safety while they are in the workplace or in the office or wherever?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great question. There's a lot of things that the CDC is recommending, and one of the hard parts right now is every single state has its own, executive orders and guidelines and return to work protocols. So you have to kind of, depending on where you are, you have to think about what's the federal government saying, what's the CDC saying, and what is my state saying. There are obviously some common points, and I think anyone who is having employees return to the workplace needs to think about employee safety. So a lot of things, the common things that we're all thinking about is social distancing. How do you potentially reconfigure your workplace to comply with social distancing requirements? Is it, having people sit in every other cubicle? Is it having meetings via teleconference or Zoom even when you're in the office? If that's not possible, limiting the number of people that are in a conference room together and making sure everyone is social distance within the conference room. Masks. If you can't social distance, be sure to have your masks. Having proper disinfecting procedures in your workplace. If you're a workplace that employees use different tools and different machinery, making sure you have clean down procedures, that people aren't sharing tools anymore, they have their own. If you can't do that, making sure you clean between every person who uses them. So there's a myriad of different ways in which the work think about how do we comply with this? And it really is a new normal.
Yeah. Wow. It's complicated because so many offices are based on the open plan. They do have cubicles. They do have people working virtually shoulder to shoulder. I wonder if that era is gone and we're going to be talking about just an overall redesign of office space as a result of this going forward.
Absolutely. And that's part of our return to work resource center talks about that. To the extent that you're developing a new office space right now, or you're going to reconfigure, we have tools on there for how to negotiate your contracts with your construction vendors to take into account these new requirements and how to design your workplace in a sort of COVID-19 era. A lot of this is, I'm dealing with companies right now and helping them create staggered schedules so that they have people on and people off, and you're reducing the number of people you have in the workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So there's ways to do it, but I think the common idea is, how do we social distance? How do we keep things disinfected and clean? And how do we keep people safe? And there's a lot of different ways to do that.
And perhaps there's a rethinking of the whole work from home issue. You're going to want to bring some employees or a lot of your employees back into the workplace, but maybe there are some who could do the job from home. And maybe employers need to start thinking about that on a permanent basis, right?
I think so. I think teleworking is what the pandemic has done is it's proven to a lot of people and a lot of companies that work can be done. It can be done efficiently, and it can be done well in a telework situation. So I think there's going to be some rethinking about the types of workers that absolutely have to be together in a physical workspace, and those that don't. At least in the near term future, I think that's going to be the absolute new normal. And I think a lot of companies are thinking about, do we need this office space? Is this overhead necessary? Can we actually, save money by dispersing our workforce a little more than we did before? Because we now know it works. I think people were afraid to sort of go down this path, but this has forced us to do so.
Yeah. What about manager training? It seems like that's going to be a big effort. And how do you go about that? And what does that consist of? And just what are some best practices approach to that particular issue?
Absolutely. I think the CDC and states are putting a big emphasis on managerial and supervisory training to really tell managers this is what the new normal looks like, and here are all the component parts, so they can not only show employees how to do it and be the models for that kind of new behavior, but also being the resource, because they're going to be facing a lot of questions and concerns and comments from employees about how do we do this now in this new environment. So in our return to work resource, we have 5 different set types of trainings that are done via webinar that range from literally just how do you set up your workplace in this new environment, from social distancing, the things we were just talking about, to employee health information privacy concerns, because a lot of the new normal is we're going to take temperatures, we're going to you have to prove that you're healthy to come into the workplace. Well, that's health information, and how do you protect that kind of thing? Because those gotten in the wrong hands, that can be a dangerous thing to have out there.
Yeah, interesting. You should talk about webinars. So in effect, the training itself, it practices social distancing. It's not necessarily face-to-face or anything. The big issue here, and I think this is one of the things going forward for which there may not be much precedent, is the liability issue. If an employee comes back to work and gets the disease from supposedly being at work, what is the liability that accrues to the employer in a case like that?
Well, that's a great question. And, you mentioning there not being a great precedent for this is exactly right. The reality is this is a new landscape for everybody. But, as an employment lawyer, I've seen the types of lawsuits that employees and plaintiffs' lawyers bring. And the reality is, if you aren't taking all the required steps, either by the CDC or your state, to keep your workplace safe, and there is an outbreak and there, God forbid, are deaths related to that, or people missing work related to that, you better believe that somebody's going to bring a lawsuit that says you operated your workplace in a negligent way. You were told you were told all the standards and you didn't do it, and people got hurt or sick. So I think it's critical to pay attention to all the requirements and make sure that you are checking those boxes.
Yeah. Does your resource guide address the possibility of a second wave, which is what everyone's afraid of later in the year? And if so, how can employers prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the second wave is what everyone's talking about right now. And, the return to work resource guide not only has the resources that we've developed for the first wave. So a lot of the things that employers were doing to deal with the first wave, which was, unfortunately, how to furlough employees, how to structure layoffs, how to communicate those types of things to your employees. The FFCRA, the leaves, the paid sick leave, the emergency FMLA, those types of things. Obviously, we now have resources for return to work. And if there's a second wave, our first set of resources for the first wave will be come back in handy, and be useful and can be utilized by employers sort of dealing with a second wave. And at the end of the day, it's such a fluid situation, and there's new federal laws and new state laws. And, our firm has stayed on top of every one of those and helped create policies and procedures and checklists, really on a real-time basis.
Well, Colin Barnacle, thanks so very much for sharing with us Akerman's expertise on the question of returning to work and the return to work resource guide that your firm has put out. It looks like some really good guidelines to how employers can address this issue going forward. Thank you very much for talking to us today. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, and have a great day.